Hello, today is July 24th, 2019, and I am in South Bend, Indiana, where I have had the privilege of meeting Dr. E. Michael Jones. Thank you, Dr. Jones, for inviting me here.
You're welcome. Welcome to South Bend. Welcome
Great.
to Indiana.
And how is South Bend? How is life here?
Beautiful. We're having a nice summer. It's a beautiful place. Beautiful place. I've lived here for 40 years now.
And have the policies of your mayor, Pete Buttigieg, has he enriched the city? Has he made it a better place?
He's been here now for about 7 years. During the course of this time, he's engaged in projects that are give public displays that are supposed to impress people, but the city has the infrastructure has continued to decay, and at this point, we're starting to see that this place was just a stepping stone in his career. He's always had ambitions beyond South Bend, so we'll be left to pay the debts that we have because of the things that he's done, but nothing much has changed.
So, as you know, I am on a tour of the United States. I have seen more of this country than I ever have. And I'm seeing two different countries at the same time. I'm seeing the way that people live in the cities such as Boston, New York City, Columbus, Ohio, Washington, D.C., and then I'm also spending time in the country, too, a country where people are not packed in as densely. So what do you make of this, where the city's people are pursuing careers, money, pleasure, and status, and in the countryside or outside of these dense areas where people seem to still have some ideas of how to have a family, how to pursue the natural order, more natural than what you can see in the cities, which, as I can tell you, is full of gay pride stuff, full of people getting drunk, and so on.
Well, you brought up the mayor. The mayor was, in effect, the oligarchs anointing someone to come here and basically take over South Bend and incorporate South Bend into the American empire. That's what he's here to do. This man represents the interest of the oligarchs. Shortly before before his, I believe it was his second term, the people of Indiana passed something called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was basically an attempt to protect them, the people of Indiana, from the homosexual agenda, from basically this promotion of systematic promotion of homosexuality as a form of social control. The fact that the people passed this bill, the legislature passed the bill, enraged the oligarchs. And they came here and they started threatening the state government. If you don't overturn this law, we are going to withdraw. We're going to pull. One of the main villains in this story was Mark Benioff of Salesforce. He was going to pull Salesforce out of South Bend, Indiana. The governor at that time was Mike Pence. He's now vice president. He did not understand what was going on. He simply didn't understand it. This is a challenge to representative government. So what you have here is the American empire on the one hand, and you've got the people of the United States who are basically a colony, just like overseas colonies. So the big battle here came in the run-up to World War II. The protest movement that tried to keep America out of the war was America First. America First was largely situated in the Midwest, where we are now, which was the manufacturing center of the United States of America. Charles Lindbergh was one of the great proponents of this. Henry Ford, obviously the Ford Motor Company, that's in Detroit. What you saw in places like South Bend were people that built automobiles, Studebaker, they built parts for Detroit and things like that. And these people wanted to stay out of the war. A lot of them were German, had German ancestors. They didn't want to fight Germany. And this all stopped with Pearl Harbor. We now know that if Pearl Harbor was a false flag, that the United States lured Japan into making this attack so that they could appear to be attacked so that they could declare war and enter the war on the side of England against Germany. So over this period of time, you've had the systematic destruction of American life in the provinces and the systematic aggrandizement of power in the sources of power on the coasts. Washington, you've lived there. The growth of Washington has been enormous over this period of time. And what you see here is the opposite of that growth. You see empty buildings, okay? Because this is what empires do. They suck the lifeblood out of the provinces and concentrate it into the hands of fewer and fewer people in the main cities. So I think that's what you're seeing here.
Have you been to a big American city in the month of June? Have you seen what they are doing there?
Look, every parade is a gay pride parade, and South Bend is no exception. I came to South Bend 40 years ago, okay, from Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I was struck by the Catholic nature of South Bend. I'm a Catholic myself, but I was also struck on the 4th of July. It was like days after we arrived here. We went downtown, and everybody was downtown. Everybody. And I was struck by the diversity of the crowd. In other words, there were well-to-do people there. There were obviously less well-to-do people, but they were all united as Americans celebrating 4th of July. Well, we don't have 4th of July celebrations anymore. We have gay pride celebrations because our homosexual mayor has basically commandeered the resources of this city in order to promote this agenda. This is a form of political control. It has had a disastrous effect on community relations here. The first obvious group now is in the news. He completely alienated the black population here because he was going to bring in about the Israelicization of the local police force, fired the local black police chief. But what the net result of all this is that basically decent people don't want to be part of your gay pride parade, so they just withdraw from the public sphere. So we don't have any public celebrations anymore. This is the end of America as an identity. What we have now is identity politics instead. So you have to be part of some type of accepted group, some type of preferred minority group, like a homosexual. That's the classic example right now, in order to be considered an American in good standing.
Do you think the kind of lifestyle they are pushing in the cities is the template how the oligarchs want us all to live in this mostly sterile, hedonistic sort of way?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. I did a piece, an ebook on the story of Cincinnati Ballet. My son and went there. He's a ballet dancer, a professional dancer. He was hired by the Cincinnati Ballet. He met a woman there. They fell in love, and they got married. And everyone was invited to the wedding in the ballet company, including the director. The director did not come. Everybody else came. And she was like Caraboss in Sleeping Beauty. Okay, Caraboss, remember, is not invited. She's the fairy that's not invited. She puts a curse on the child. The fairies then ameliorate the curse. The child was supposed to die. Instead, she slept for 100 years. Well, in this instance, my son got fired and my daughter got promoted as an assault on their marriage. Now, their marriage, the fact that they got married was an inspiration to other people there who also got married. And then the fact that my daughter-in-law got pregnant was also an inspiration. So you had 4 ballerinas getting pregnant. That's unheard of. And what it did was highlight the fact that in that type of environment, you're supposed to act like a homosexual, even if you're not a homosexual. And how do you act like a homosexual? By engaging in transient, sterile relationships.
I don't know anyone who has done that. But do you think now a lot of the problems that people face, do you think the root problem is a spiritual one? Is it?
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is.
So when someone is telling you, well, I'm having a problem meeting a wife, my family is in trouble, I don't have meaning in life. How can you help that person?
By pointing out, by describing the problem exactly. That's why I've dedicated my life to basically describing what happened. And right now, I think I mentioned to you that I'm doing a piece on a review of a movie, a horror movie about Sweden called Midsummer, which leads me then to Sweden, which leads me then to what happened in Sweden during this period of time. What you had was worldwide social engineering. And there were certain crucial figures in this regard, and Sweden was one of the crucial countries because it was considered the most advanced country in Europe. And what happened during this period of time is they were going to change the cultural settings. And the first thing they started with was sexuality, because that is the heart of the culture. And if you don't get that right, you're going to have an unhappy life. Most of the human race, at a certain point, you reach a certain point in your life and you start looking for a spouse. And this is the beginning of your real life. You know, everything in a sense is a preparation up to that, because you're living the life of someone else who did that. Your mother and your father did that, you know, before you, and you came into the world because of that. And now it's your turn, and you've got to make these crucial connections. And if you don't make these crucial connections, you're going to be unhappy. And secondly, the culture will suffer. And so what we've seen over this period of time is both of those things happening. You know, people, it started off, just to get back to Sweden, it started off with loss of faith. So let's take a crucial figure like Ingmar Bergman, the filmmaker. His father was a Lutheran minister in a country which was officially Lutheran. The state church was Lutheran. And what you saw during the transition from his father to him was loss of faith. Go to watch his movies. Watch The Seventh Seal. It's about loss of faith in a country that is based on a state church that is on a shaky foundation. And by that, I mean Lutheranism. You know, and so what we've seen over this period of time is the collapse of Protestantism.
But then what do you say to men that may say, well, this God stuff is all good, faith, yeah, there's a time, but right now I need my needs met. I need to meet a girl and have fun, go out, who they don't really have time to go to church, they say, or they're busy with work. They have to become comfortable with their jobs. What do you say to a person such
what's
as this?
more important, your job or your life? I mean, I got married. We are going to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary in next month. And when I got married, I didn't have a job. I was a junior in college. I spent that summer mowing lawns. If I had to wait to be financially secure, I still wouldn't be married, you know, and a whole group of people would not exist. And so what you have to do is get your priorities straight. To give you the opposite example, I was in New York City. I'm sitting on a bench, and there's this woman talking about, she was at home at midnight. She's telling this to another woman. I was home at midnight, and I'm eating my cheese sandwich, and I burst into tears because my life is over. I have no friends. I have no family. I have no children. All I have is my job at this prestigious law firm, which all women are to aspire to get jobs in law firms now. I mean, that's part of what it means to be a woman, isn't it? But she didn't have a life. And so one of the main things I remember at that time was I wanted a life. And so if you're just along for the sex, you're missing out on the life, because the sex is there to provide you with a life and provide someone else with a life, and that's called a family. And the only way you're going to have any type of insulation from this predatory culture is by having a family. So you can protect yourself. You've got a little cell of society that brings other life into existence. That's the normal way of life, and it's also the only thing that's going to protect you. Now, the only way you can have that is if you have faith. Because if you don't have faith, then you see no point. Why should I sacrifice anything? Because there's no bigger plan. If you do have faith, you start to think, well, God has a plan. And if God has a plan, then I should know what it is. because if I want to be happy, I can't be happy unless I'm following God's plan. So all it means is you're taking sex out of the vacuum in which it's portrayed, out of the matrix of basically control, which is now being used and people are being exploited, and putting into its natural matrix, which is God's plan for your happiness and the progress of the human race.
So what do you say to a man of faith where God is at the center of his life? He is trying to meet a girl, and he's meeting women that are close but more career obsessed than thinking about God. Maybe God is in the back room while her career and her current enjoyments are in the main room. And he thinks she's close, but she still needs a lot of work in order to get her faith aligned with what he actually has. So what kind of advice can you give to men who are meeting women who are flawed, but in a way that they're not as spiritual as they could be, or the only spirituality they really possess is going to their yoga class 3 times a week?
Well, why are you hanging out with this woman? Well, you must find something attractive here. And obviously, it could be physically attractive, but that after a while, there's a kind of something behind the spirituality, because you're talking to the woman. And talk has nothing, in a sense, to do with the physical aspect. That's the intellectual or spiritual aspect. So at this point, you have to make a decision. Are we getting somewhere? Are we getting somewhere in terms of our talking to each other? Are we coming to a meeting of the minds? I mean, I told you this before, but I met a woman over the internet, who approaches me, and she's from Iran. And we have these long discussions. It's not going to lead to marriage here. But I said, what we need is unprotected intercourse, And that's, in a sense, what you need. You need someone who you can be absolutely truthful with and talk things about things as you understand them. And if you have a meeting of the minds, well, then you should be able to come to priorities. And be able to adjust priorities of like, well, I know this is your job, but is this your career? And is that the most important thing? Is that more important than a relationship, a family relationship? And if it is, how are we going to resolve this? And if we can't resolve it, I guess we have to go our separate ways. I mean, I'm doing a book on Logos. We are creatures of Logos, and the answer to every question is Logos. And usually it's come down to some type of intense discussion between the two parties where you realize, well, I guess we do have a lot in common. I guess we should pursue this, or I guess we don't. So it's education, it's talking. That's what I'm saying.
One thing I encounter with women and men too is that when it comes to faith, they want to pick and choose. So they take the supermarket cart down the aisle and only put in their basket the doctrines they want to believe. That kind of still allows them to live the life that they want. How important do you think, when it comes to faith, to submitting totally to the church authority that they are a part of? Or do you think that a little bit of the New Age concept of picking and choosing, of thinking that, well, God is one and we're connected to the universe, do you think that is actually helpful?
No, picking and choosing is consumerism. So they have a term called cafeteria Catholicism, which is basically you're putting American consumerism as the ultimate criterion in how you judge everything else. Well, that's not religion. That's not what God says. God says in the first commandment, he says, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have strange gods before me. You have to put this one first. So you have to take it step by step, I don't know where you are, but is there a God? If you don't think there is, I can prove that there is, that there has to be a God. Okay? If he is, then he created everything, which means he created you. Does he have a plan for the universe? Well, I think we could talk about that, Did he manifest this plan in history? Yeah, I think he did. I think this is Jesus Christ came and became the center point of all of human history. And at that point, you say, well, did he have a plan? Or did he just die and leave, or come back from the dead and went someplace else? No, he had a plan. He created a church. There's only one church that he created, and I can tell you it is not any of the Protestant churches, because they all came into existence after 1517. So what happened between 0 and 1517? Nothing?
We were lost.
What happened? You asked Martin Luther this question, and he never came up with a decent answer. So at this point, you're saying, well, yeah, it's the Catholic Church. And then you say, well, does the Catholic Church teach things? Well, yeah, they do. As a matter of fact, they have a pretty specific plan for your life, and your happiness will depend on you doing it God's way, not your way. And I'm saying God's way is not just some generality. I've already told you, just by tracing through history, what God's way is and where you can find it right here and right now. And there are people who say, like people have talked about Logos, have long discussions about Logos, and they're going to say, well, I'm going to do it my way. Well, that's good. I'm glad you believe in Logos. I'm glad you want to do it, but good luck on doing it your way. I don't see much chance for success if you just plan to do it your way, because who gave you the authority to understand things in any deep way? And I've also talked to some group of guys, and there are gurus out there who want to give you the plan for life. And I said, well, I'm not one of them, because I don't think I have that capability. If you ask me a specific question, I'll try to give you an answer. But if you want the whole picture, we're talking about 2,000 years of very intelligent people who dealt with very serious issues. And what I'm saying is, you need the accumulated wisdom of all these people if you want to have some type of understanding of what the right way is. And that's just on a natural level. And then if you add in a supernatural level, where there's a God who has a plan for your specific life, and he will give you the power in your life to help you overcome all your weaknesses, your addictions, your problems, your selfishness, your stupidity, and all this other type of stuff, well, I don't see any reason why you should refuse that. You would be foolish to turn that down.
Now, I've spent a lot of time in the cities on this tour, and whenever I'm in front of a Protestant church in the city, there's always a woke statement on front. There's Black Lives Matters, there's Refugees Welcome, there's also the gay flags, especially in Boston, there was a lot of that. Some of the Protestant churches have all three. In my travels, I've seen Catholic churches, I've seen Orthodox churches. I haven't seen those kind of propaganda. So what is it about the Protestant church that is causing them to basically go along with what the secular world, with what the oligarchs want them to do?
All of the Protestant churches started out as state churches. All of those state churches were created by the theft of church property and the disconnection from Rome. In other words, disconnecting from the universal church that had been established up to that point. So if you belong to a state church, if your salary is coming from the state, you are naturally going to go along with what the state wants. So we now have a situation where the culture of the Christian culture, which was the patrimony of the Catholic Church, has been evaporating for 500 years now. And slowly and then more quickly, and as I said, I'm talking about Sweden at this point. It's on my mind because I'm doing research into Ingmar Bergman. It happened like that, suddenly, between Ingmar Bergman's father, who was a Lutheran minister, to Ingmar Bergman, who is the revolutionary, the follower of Nietzsche, all of those modern writers, a hedonist. He wielded enormous power because he knew how to make interesting movies. But what you're seeing here is the evaporation of Protestantism. It's simply has lost its hold on the people of Scandinavia, for example. So, when you got a guy like Henrik at Red Ice Radio, very intelligent guy, who just feels that it's not persuasive, so he's become a white guy. And there's this kind of white nationalism. But then he invites me on the Christmas show. And there's Hedrick, the pagan, the neo-pagan wearing a Santa Claus hat. And he and Lana are talking about memories of Christmas, and then they want me to talk about it. And I'm feeling a little bit uneasy because it's not memories for me. I mean, I celebrate Christmas every year. It's an ongoing thing. But when you've cut yourself off from it, then you have this nostalgia for this past that can only be restored through Christianity. I mean, you're not going to do Thor and Freya, and that's not going to restore it. That's going to lead you into human sacrifice, which is precisely what that movie, Midsummer, is about.
What do you think of the Protestant doctrine sola scriptura, which basically is, if it's not in the Bible, it's not a valid doctrine, it's not from...
Yes, there's a paradox here, of course. Sola scriptura is not in the Bible. Okay, you can't find it anywhere in the Bible. This was cooked up by Martin Luther, who now I'm beginning to realize had an absolutely devastating effect on Europe. For 500 years, he's had a devastating effect on Europe. And so it's not just... I mean, I've talked about Luther, the notion of the enslaved will. Luther was a Catholic priest. He was a monk. He rebelled against the church. As a result, he always had trouble with controlling his passions. And then at a certain point, he felt he couldn't control them anymore. And so he was involved with getting nuns, breaking into convents and dragging nuns out and then offering them to bishops as concubines or wives. We call people like that pimps these days, but this is what the Reformed Party was doing. And so he capitulates. He couldn't control his appetite for drink, for food. Anger was a problem. And finally, lust knocks him down, and he gets one of these nuns and marries her, breaking his vows, breaking her vows. And then he says the worst thing he did was he blamed it on God. He said, God did it. And he talked about the enslaved will and say, you can't control your passions. If devil gets on you, he'll ride you like you're just a pack animal. Whether the devil's on you or whether God's on you, you have no choice in the matter. Well, this had a devastating effect on the moral law, and the moral law is the basis for the social law. And so for over 500 years, it had a devastating effect on Europe. So you see, Bergman's an example of it. You know, he totally capitulated to his sexual desires and couldn't pull himself out of it. It became the basis of his rebellion. And then when he got together with the Social Democrats, it became the basis for social engineering. And then they were collaborating with the United States to overturn obscenity laws all throughout Europe. So it had a devastating effect. This decay of Protestantism is having a devastating effect to this day, to the point where in Scandinavia you have this white nationalism rising to fill the vacuum. In England you have white nationalism and Islam filling the vacuum.
Was it you who said that if you give an English speaker a Bible, you'll have a brand new church in 3 years?
I said something like that. I said, if you give an Englishman a Bible, you get a revolutionary. And this is what happened in the 17th century. You had these groups of people who finally, they felt sola scriptura. I have the right. I have the authority. And the only thing they're interested in is the Old Testament, because that's where all the interesting stories are. And so suddenly they're saying, well, Hebrew should be the language of England. This is what Praise God Barebones was proposing. And you had the ranters and the diggers and the levelers and the Quakers and all of these people, and nobody could stand them. You can't talk to people like this. And so they drove them out. Some of them went to Holland. A lot of them came over here, and we inherited this crazy disease. I grew up in Philadelphia, which was founded by Quakers. You can't talk to a Quaker, because every Quaker is directly inspired by the Holy Spirit. So this led to chaos. Once you have this chaos, then you have to have a totalitarian reaction. And that's what, has happened repeatedly.
Speaking of Pennsylvania, I was in Valley Forge,
yes,
which was where George Washington kept his army for the winter. And as I toured this site, I was shocked by the amount of Freemason symbols that were all over. And I was under the belief that the United States was founded a Christian nation. But the more I dug into it, the more that doesn't seem to hold water. What do you think?
Yeah, it was. Well, what do you mean a Christian nation? You
That
mean there are
the
lots?
people who
There are lots of Christians here.
right.
Virtually everybody was a Christian here. But did that mean the oligarchs? Was that the framework that they used? No, it wasn't. They were Freemasons, and Freemasonry had a kind of stultifying effect on America in the same way that Islam has had a stultifying effect on Iran. It was the religion of the oligarchs in the United States of America, all the way up to till very recently.
What do you feel about? I got a copy of the Declaration of Independence, and one of the main lines is for the pursuit of happiness. This is what the founders wanted. Now, was this in a hedonistic sort of way, of just to do what you want, or was this sort of happiness connected to living a spiritual life?
Yes, they were all homosexuals, and happiness meant gay pride parades. No, obviously this was not the case here. They were traditional Englishmen who lived traditional lives and believed that happiness would mean family, property. The original term was property. That's what Locke said. So it was life, property, life, liberty, and property. So this was a substitute for property.
I was in Boston, and the John Hancock building was draped in a banner where John Hancock's signature was colored in the gay rainbow colors. Do you think he still would have signed the Declaration of Independence?
Do you think John Hancock was a homosexual?
No, I do not.
Is this something that's been hidden from us all these
hidden
years?
knowledge.
Why didn't I know? Pete Buttigieg has now said 2 presidents were homosexuals. Why didn't we know this, Pete? How come you are the one? Is it because, wait a minute, is it a coincidence that you happen to be a homosexual, that you come up with this? Is this the jaundiced eye? See, is everything's yellow to the jaundiced eye? This is why you cannot allow homosexuals into political office. They can't represent anyone but their own narcissistic fantasies. That's all they represent. This man does not represent the people of South Bend, Indiana. He's here to wag his finger. He's got what we call homosexual privilege, which means he's infallible. And so he can lecture you on your marriage. He can lecture Donald Trump and say because he's living with some guy and some Episcopalian minister was willing to go through the scandalous ceremony of some type of pseudo-marriage. This gives him the right to lecture Donald Trump on his marriage. This is insufferable. He's become totally insufferable. And this is another indication of why this is not a democratic procedure. There are people now who are saying there are going to be, we now have narrowed it down to 4 candidates, 4 Democratic candidates. The 4 top candidates. Who decided this? Not one vote has been cast. There is probably not one black person in South Carolina who would ever vote for Pete Buttigieg. Okay? And yet he's considered a serious candidate purely because of oligarchic manipulation of the media. That's all we're talking about here.
Do you think that the oligarchs have gone too far, that there are too many people that are beginning to wake up, and that a possible change is coming?
Yes, they have gone too far. If you take the sexual revolution, why does this make sense? Let's go back to Sweden in the middle of the 20th century. You've grown up in a Lutheran society. It's kind of Victorian. It's kind of straight-laced. Maybe it's a little extreme, maybe a little bit too repressive. Maybe it's this way. I don't know that you could portray it this way. So what do? You appeal to the overwhelming majority that if you're elected or whatever, I will give you permission to act out your sexual desires. Well, the overwhelming majority of people are heterosexual. 98% of the population have heterosexual desires, so you have to appeal to those people in order to get them on board, which is exactly what they did by spreading pornography through Sweden, through Germany, through all the United States at this period of time. Now, this does not appeal. This homosexual thing is like, there's a logic to this in terms of development, and now this is like the cutting edge of liberation, but it doesn't appeal to people. Why would it appeal to people? To the 2%, well, they can sort of do what they want, but now it's not enough. They have to tell you how you are going to act, which means you have to engage in transient sterile relationships, and people are going to be annoyed at that. I think as soon as you point out the logic of what's going on, as soon as you point out that sexual liberation is a form of political control, the dime drops and people start saying, I'm not going to go along with that. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
You know, me probably, like you, don't want to think of what gays are doing, but they seem to be really trying to jam it down our throat nonstop. One thing I'm noticing they are doing is to redefine the word love. They keep pushing love as the bond between two gays, which anyone who has lived in the city knows that the bond between two gay people is the most fleeting that you can find. And I also read an article that said for the first time ever, homosexual acceptance has gone down. Less people find it as favorable.
That's
so what
right.
do you make of that?
It's Pete Buttigieg. I think they're overplaying their hand. Pete is overplaying his hand. You know, this insufferable attitude that he has, this insufferable moral superiority. Because you're a homosexual? I don't get it. I don't get it. Who gave you the right to lecture me about my marriage? You know? So they overplayed their hand, and people are starting to wake up to it, that there's something else going on here. There's something, and obviously it is. This is the avant-garde. The homosexual is the proxy warrior of the oligarch. That's what's going on. He is the classic example of that. Classic example. The only thing that makes sense to him, other than his own narcissistic fantasies, is serving the oligarchs and doing what they want. That's what the Rhodes Scholarship is there to do. That's what Harvard University is there to do. That's what he's doing. And people are starting to realize, well, all right, Pete, you're the smartest guy in any room in Indiana, but you don't represent anybody here. You can't get why is he running for president? Like mayor to president? Well, aren't there offices in between? Well, the fact of the matter is he can't get elected to anything. He could hardly get elected here. The first election, he got elected under false pretenses because he disguised the fact that he was homosexual, suppressed that, because he would not have gotten elected because there were 5 candidates in a Democratic primary, which is the only primary that means anything, or only election that means anything. Second election, he goes on Colbert and says, I got 80% of the vote. Well, wait a minute. Let's walk that back a little bit. You mean of the 11% who showed up at the polls, you got 80%? That sounds like 8.8% to me. That would be declared invalid if it were held in Bosnia. So he's never been able to get the people behind him. And now we're using the illusion machine of the mass media to bypass that whole thing.
Now, as you may not know, I was planning a preliminary run for the presidency.
I heard that.
I have a couple of policies I would like to share with you. One is to ban all immigrants, all of them. Just sort our own problems, get the illegals that we have now out. I wanted to ban usury. And I also wanted to give a state-sponsored foreign girlfriend to men who cannot find an American girlfriend in the cities because the girls here are so obsessed with their jobs and they want to delay childbirth. What kind of policies do you think would be most helpful now based on the state that the United States is in?
From a foreign policy, we have to break this pathological relationship with Israel. It is driving us into the situation in Iran is purely a function of the Israeli control over our foreign policy. We have to break that. We absolutely have to break that. The second thing, from a domestic point of view, is that we have to start revivifying American manufacturers. You cannot be a wealthy nation without manufacturers. And what we've seen over this period of time, let's say from the beginning of the Paul Volcker's head as the head of the Federal Reserve System, is the systematic plundering of the manufacturing base of the United States of America. This is leading to poverty. It will lead to a general collapse. So this is what, to be honest with you, I thought Donald Trump was going to do. And he seems obviously have done things in terms of manufacturing. put tariffs on goods coming from China, things like that. But it turns out he's a complete pawn of the most radical extremist form of the Israel lobby, namely the Likudniks. And this is going to be a disaster for his presidency, because now he has backed himself in a corner with Iran. He has completely misunderstood the Iranian people. He has unified the country at a time when there was internal dissent, where they have to sort out certain problems. He has painted himself in a corner because he sent the fleet over there, but the fleet's apparently not going to attack, and so he called off an attack at the last minute. He's put himself in an untenable situation by hiring people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who are warmongers and totally dedicated to Israeli foreign policy. So it's tragic, because the mandate he was given was the mandate of the people of Indiana, who felt that there were two parties that represented the oligarchs' interest and no party that represented their interest. And that's why Donald Trump is in the White House now.
If you were to give Donald Trump a grade based on now 2.5 years or longer, 3 years that he's been in office, what grade would you give him?
Foreign policy, F.
F.
For economic policy, B. For pro-life work, A. And it's all incoherent. So you're pro-life. He's defunded Planned Parenthood. Well, good for him. That's good. You did that. You understand that that's why people voted for you. Some people voted for you. But then he signs this order saying that the United States is now going to promote gay liberation throughout the world. That makes no sense. He's a man of passion and not reason. And so it comes across as incoherence.
Do you find it strange that the policies the United States puts on the world to weaken foreign countries are policies that they already perfected here?
Yeah, of course that's how it worked. What you first of all, let's put it this way. There was World War II. The United States conquered Germany. They immediately, the immediate plan was the Morgenthau Plan, which is basically the Jewish Secretary of the Treasury planning to starve Germany to death. At that point, the adults, like the WASP ruling class, which was in power, woke up and said, well, wait a minute, you're driving these people into the arms of the Soviet Union by doing this, so let's have the Marshall Plan. But at that point, it was social engineering by another method, and it became the sexual corruption of Germany, and at the same time, they were trying that out in that laboratory, then they brought it over here about 10 years later. And so by 1964, you had the Jews in Hollywood trying to break the production code. You had the Jews, like the AJC, people like Leo Pfeffer, overturning obscenity laws, always on the side of what they call free speech. Jews in favor of free speech. This is a kind of new thing. Now, we don't see that anymore, because at that point they did not control the culture, and so they wanted to change it as revolutionaries. Now they do control the culture, and now they're going to ban anybody who criticizes them or talks about the real social order. So, yes, we're talking about social engineering. The group that got attacked here was the Catholics after World War II. I've talked about this in my book, The Slaughter of Cities, the systematic destruction of Catholic neighborhoods. Using the black people at that time were the proxy warriors of the oligarchs. And they would be brought into cities like Chicago and take over whole sections of the city, drive the Catholics out of their neighborhoods. And once the Irish or the Poles left their neighborhoods and moved to the suburbs, they became white people, and therefore much more easy to control.
You know, I am actually meeting a lot of Catholics on my tour, and their faith, it seems strong, but they're a little bit demoralized with what is happening to their church in general. What can you say to Catholics that are watching that are not happy with how the church is going, especially the upper tiers?
Well, first of all, if you're talking about the pedophile crisis, it's a media campaign against the Catholic Church. If you do, this being said, I have spent the last 30 years of my life complaining about the sexual corruption in the Catholic Church. I was hired at this college not far from here, St. Mary's College, got fired from a Catholic college because I was against abortion. I then started to look into how this happened, and what you saw was basically groups, influential groups like the Rockefeller Foundation, determined to overturn the church's teaching on contraception. There were certain Catholics who liked this idea. You know, they liked the idea of going along with it, especially if it had the aura of being a good American, if it was that you were a good American if you limited the size of your family to 2 children. And so there was a kind of corruption of the Catholic mentality that took place over this period of time. And homosexuality is the logical outcome of that, and especially homosexuality in the clergy. It's going to be a logical outcome of this sexual corruption. There are all sorts of reasons why it happened. It's there now, and the church is going to have to deal with it, you know. But, you know, the point here is there's never been a time when the church hasn't been full of sinners. There's always been a crisis in the church, but at the same time, it is still the church that was created by Jesus Christ. He knew that. He appointed a sinner as the first pope. I mean, St. Peter denied him, and he knew that, and he knew the weaknesses, but, you know, you got a lot of people who have been so conditioned by the publicity campaign that they're ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which I think is a bad idea.
Now, as you know, I am in the Orthodox Church. How do you feel about that church?
Okay, there was the Eastern Roman Empire and there was the Western Empire, and one spoke Greek and one spoke Latin, and there were differences. And over this period of time, you know, the church collapsed in Rome, the civilization collapsed in Rome, the church was still there. Constantinople rose up, and there were these tensions between these groups, and they grew apart. And there was a schism, and they split. And the church, obviously, as a whole, has suffered. The church always suffers when there's lack of unity. So these are apostolic churches. They're not Protestant churches. But I think that they have suffered because of lack of communion with Rome, because Rome is the principle of unity. I mean, Peter did go to Rome, and he was the bishop of Rome, but Rome had a special power in terms of organizing and adjudicating disputes and bringing about unity. You have to have one leader if you're going to have unity, and Rome was that. And when you had the schism, the great schism, they lost that, and as a result, these churches became state churches. Orthodox churches are state churches. And state churches, there are problems associated with state churches in terms of the relationship to the state that I've already talked about with Protestant churches. And so there was an element, a lack of universality that I think has damaged these churches. The church they held a council in Florence in 1439 because the Turks were marching toward Constantinople, and the patriarch and the emperor wanted Europe behind him to solve that. They resolved the issues theologically, and then when the Orthodox went back, the people refused to accept them. And because they refused to accept them, the alliance didn't take place, and Constantinople fell. And that Islam profited from that lack of unity.
The only thing I can say is that I do agree with you that there are state churches, but they are in communion with each other. So while they are different, they agree that their doctrines are the same. So they aren't necessarily a different flavor of the same thing. They do try to make sure that their doctrines are the same. But that notwithstanding, I have been to a couple Orthodox monasteries. I went to the Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville, New York, and the Holy Cross Monastery in Wayne, West Virginia. And I was very impressed with the holiness of these men who just dedicated their life to Christ. If I fail in finding a wife, do you think that dedicating myself to the spiritual life in such a good way is a worthy path?
It's what's God's plan for your life. That's what you've got to figure out, because that's the only way you're going to be happy. And you can be happy as a monk. You know, some people are called to that. The overwhelming majority of people are not called to that, but some people are. But that's a question of purely individual vocation. There's a Serbian monastery outside South Bend, the New Carlisle. I've been there. I've been there many times, a few times. I wrote a book on Medjugorje that was popular among the Serbs here in this area. So I have some sense of what that is. But by the same token, I was in Estonia, and there's the Catholic bishop, and there's which patriarch is it? It's one of the patriarchs, and he's not. The whole conversation is how these Russians are trying to destroy me. So there was obviously conflict in Estonia between the Russian Orthodox and I don't remember, Antioch. Was he from the Patriarch of Antioch? Anyway, there's been conflict between these churches that I've noticed.
Do you think in general, if a man doesn't figure out the family life, if he doesn't have one, there's not many alternatives for him? I mean, because if a man doesn't have a family and he doesn't pursue a spiritual life, the next best thing he can do is live in the city and pursue one pleasure or satisfaction after
That's not
the next.
enough. Man is a social animal. He's by nature a political animal, which means you have to be in some type of group in order to be happy. You're not going to be happy all by yourself, especially in a situation like this where you'll just succumb to the temptations that are always put in your way as an individual. The main thing that keeps you from temptation is relationships, as far as I can tell, no matter what it is. If you're living in a family, you have to adjust your life to the common good, no matter what it is, in terms of food, in terms of order. The father is the head of the family. He's got to establish that order, and he can only establish the social order if he can establish the moral order within himself. So the position you're in as a father forces you to come to some type of order, impose the moral order on your own life, which is always a struggle. And then because you're successful at that, you can impose some type of social order on the family. Because if you don't, you're always going to be, your kids immediately know, they're always there to say, well, you just said, you're not doing you're not practicing what you preach. They have this, uncanny ability to find it out. So you're forced, in a sense, to practice what you preach because of that.
But what do you think of the option to just get a cabin in the woods, not to elect not to be a part of this? Get your cabin, you be one with nature, just be close to nature, and you pray.
That's the scenario for a horror movie. Type in a cabin in the woods, and it turns out it's a horror movie.
Because that's what I was thinking of.
This is not a coincidence. This is not a coincidence. Or before it became a horror movie, you can read Walden by Thoreau. And he did it for about a year, and then he went back to living with normal people. He moved from Emerson's property. He became an abolitionist, and so on and so forth. It doesn't work. Now, that being said, I went to the monastery in Norway, out in the middle of nowhere on a beautiful lake up in the mountains of Norway. And there's Father Robert, who's an American. And his assistant is Monk Seraphin, who's an Estonian, and now Brother Mikael is there. And they're living the monastic life, the three of them, all by themselves. And Father Robert started off as a Carthusian in Kentucky, the same monastery where Thomas Merton lived. And he was determined, he's determined to be a hermit, which means just you, all by yourself. Well, you need a lot of spiritual firepower to do that, because otherwise it'll be a horror movie and you'll go crazy. So anyway, he does this. He's living in the Andes, an exceptional man. He's living in the Andes all by himself in some mountain in the Andes. And his superior from Kentucky shows up, and actually Merton's superior too. And he says to him, "You can't do this. This is all wrong." He said, "You need a gun and a telephone." Father Robert, a gun and a telephone? So at that point he left, and that's why he's in Norway. So the funny part of the story is that Dom James then moves into Thomas Merton's hermitage down in Bardstown, and he's got a gun and a telephone. So guess what happens? the thugs from Kentucky who inhabit that neck of the woods break into his hermitage, tie him up with his phone cord, and pistol whip him with his gun. This is God's punishment for monks thinking they need guns and telephones. So if you're planning to do this, prepare yourself spiritually, because Simon Stylites sat on a pillar for 33 years, but you need enormous types of spiritual power to do that. And if you're asking me for personal advice from going from 0 to 60, from the pickup artist to the sitting on a pillar, I'm going to say, you should probably prepare yourself spiritually.
Is there any general advice you can give to men in a similar position as me? They're middle-aged or approaching that. They bought the lie that they have to live in the city and work to achieve, get your condo, date women who are as obsessed about career as they are. And now they're at an age where their energy is not as high. Maybe they found God. But what can they do?
First of all, you don't have the biological clock that women have. So you could still have a successful marriage. And women, for some strange reason, like older men. It seems to me they like older. I'm older than my wife. I was 17 and she was 16 when we got married. So she admired me as an old... No, I'm joking there. But so it's possible. But maybe... what happened after the decadence of the Roman Empire is that the monasteries grew up, because the monastery was an alternative to a failed empire. I've written about this in a book called The League of St. Benedict, which is on Amazon, if you can buy it. It's like a pamphlet-style book. But Benedict people were disgusted with everything to do with the empire. So we're living in a failed empire. It's going to fail sooner or later. All empires fail. It looks to me as if we're on the end game scenario right now. And in these moments, people look for spiritual alternatives. So a monastery could be an alternative. There's a Benedictine monastery down here. There's a Serbian monastery here. There's a monastery in Norway. There are all kinds of people who are doing it right now, and maybe this will become more attractive to people.
If I join a monastery, would you come and visit me?
Of course I would. Of course I would. I'll bring you a cake with a file in it. I will do whatever I can to make you happy in your monastery.
Great. So one thing I want to talk about your work a bit. I had the opportunity to see the office where you ship your books, and as a writer myself, I know how hard it is to write a single book, but you have written many that are over 1,000 pages long. To anyone who writes, what advice can you give them? How does someone even approach the level of output that you have done?
Well, I didn't start off writing 1,000-page books. I started off, after I got fired from academia, I started a magazine, and it was a monthly magazine, and I would write an article. And that's the way you get started. You start with something small. You start with writing. If you're on board here with what we're talking about, well, then we have Culture Wars magazine. And if you're interested in something that you think we're interested in, well, submit something to Culture Wars magazine, like a review. A book review is easy to do, or a movie review is easy to do. So what happened here is that I got in the habit of writing every month. I had a monthly deadline. I knew I had to do the writing, the heavy lifting when it came to writing. And so I got in the habit of writing on a monthly basis. And then at a certain point, you began to see connections that simply couldn't be covered within the purview of a monthly article. And so obviously I'd written a book, a dissertation, The Angel and the Machine, that was a book. I'd written a book on Medjugorje, but then I started a series of articles which were basically on the moral lives of intellectuals, which nobody really talked about, because everybody thought, oh, well, that's one thing. No, they're very intimately related. And so I put them together, and that was Degenerate Moderns. And then after I did that, I thought, someone said, well, you should do something on music. And I thought, okay, I'll be another article. But then it came so complicated. I did Dionysus Rising, and then I did something on architecture. So there were 3 books. but they generate it out of the magazine format. So that's the way you get started, you know.
Now, I don't mean to doubt you, but are you absolutely sure that Logos, which is spelled Logos, is pronounced Logos?
Yes,
Okay.
because I grew up in Philadelphia, and we have direct access to Logos. No, it's my Philadelphia accent.
Because I heard that it's also pronounced Logos. Would I seem
Do you want to go back? Do you have a
unintelligent?
time machine? Fly back to the time of Heraclitus. Howard Heraclitus. He was a Persian, by the way. He lived in Persia. He lived in Ionia. He lived in Ephesus, and it was right on the border there of Persia and Greek culture. I don't know. I mean, it's a way I pronounce it now because of the way I've
Because
grown up.
you've gotten a lot of other men to pronounce it in that way too.
Good. Well, that's good. That's good. We're all.
So, can you tell us more about this book, Logos? You've been working on it for
Yes.
some time.
It
A lot of
grew-
people are excited about it. When can we expect
I think
it?
it'll be done by the end of the year. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, it grew out of me traveling to places like Iran. Like, how are we going to talk? The people want to talk. You know, I'm in Iran. People want to talk to me. I want to talk to them. What's the basis? I've told you before. I had a long conversation with, an Iranian woman over the internet. I've never met her in person. But, it came to help me understand this kind of dichotomy in Iranian culture. You've got Islam on the one hand, and you've got science. You've got scientists who are Muslims, and then they go to places like Europe, and then they suddenly, well, how do these two things hold together? How can you be a nuclear physicist and I started to realize, part of the book is to go back to someone like Averroes or Ibn Rushd. He was confronted with the same thing. He's trying to understand Aristotle, but the official religion is the Quran. Aristotle says the world is eternal. The Quran says it's created in time. How do you resolve this type of thing? Is it science or is it religion? Is it type of thing? The book grew out of these type of discussions, or a discussion going through India, which is a completely different culture, absolutely completely different. Where the Hindu boy asked me if I can prove the existence of God. So it's all of these conversations coming together, and the fact that, okay, the one good thing about the American empire is that a lot of people can talk to each other now, because a lot of people speak English now. It's kind of like the lingua franca of the world. And now we not only have that, we have instruments that allow us to talk to people all over the world. So every day I'll get correspondence from all over the world: South America, Iran, Africa, Europe, India, all of these. You got correspondence all over the world. So it's not so, well, okay, we know we can speak English, but how do we say something more sophisticated than, how much does it cost and I'll take 10? Is there a possibility? And that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm saying that if you look at it, you can come to some type of understanding of who we are as human beings through the study of Logos, because we are rational creatures. And I'm going to trace the evolution of this rationality through history, all the way up to the present day.
And how many pages do you think your new book will be, so I know how much time to block out when it's time to read
I
it?
never
How
set
many
off with
thousands of pages?
I don't know. I hope it's not that long. I don't set out to write 1,000-page books. It's just one thing after another. So I'm hoping it's not that long. I'd like to get this thing done. I'd like to get this thing done so that we can have these discussions, see what people are saying. Because in many ways, this is going to be the most abstract book I've ever written, because there's nothing more abstract than being. It's as abstract as you can get. And what can you say about being other than it is? And this is the type, you're dealing with this rarefied area of metaphysics that is complicated and abstract. And so I'm hoping that, I can make that comprehensible so that we can have a discussion here.
In the previous interview we did, we talked mostly about Libido Dominandi, the book of yours. That book for me was very essential in connecting why I did the things I did. Why was it so normalized in the
Yes.
culture?
Yes.
And many men, I hope, they bought that book and they read it. What next book of yours should men who read Libido Dominandi, what would be the logical next book for them to continue this path of understanding?
Well, so you had the sexual subversion. Then the question is, well, who did it? Who were the main characters?
I think I know who.
So the next book would be the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. So I just went back. I did the Kroll biography, which started me basically to realize this isn't an intra-Catholic problem. This is a universal problem. And it allowed me to see the archival material in Philadelphia, what happened to Philadelphia. That led directly to the slaughter of cities. Okay, but the first chapter, I just looked at it again. It's Leo Pfeffer, and he gave a speech called "The Triumph of Secular Humanism." And I kept saying, well, the humanists believe, well, it was the Jews. He was working for the American Jewish Committee, and the American Jewish Committee was involved in overturning obscenity laws throughout the United States, overturning school prayer. And so suddenly I realized, well, I'm talking about a specific group of people. So if you want to know how this specific group of people functions throughout history, that's the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit.
So if people want to read Culture Wars magazine or purchase the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, of which I have bought, but while on tour I haven't been able to read it, where can they go?
Culturewars.com. We have a brand new website. It's much more user-friendly, much easier to work with. We're going to eventually have every single back issue of Culture Wars and Fidelity online. So you can go there and you can pick up things that, like what I'm doing right now with Sweden. That's a movie review, but it may not make it into a book, but it's worth reading. And there are lots of things back in those back issues that you can find like that.
Now, last thing I wanted to say is that you've been a very important person on my spiritual development. You were the last thinker that I found right before I turned towards God. So I wanted to thank you personally for just doing the work that you do, because I know you didn't know I was reading your book when I did, and I wanted to thank you for inviting me to your home and taking the time to talk to me too. So, and I hope other men, they can see the value in your work in the same way that I did.
Well, it was my pleasure, but I wanted to thank you for the work you're doing. I don't know whether you saw the article in Taki magazine where it attacks you.
I think I saw.
This is attacking you for what? For giving up the hedonistic lifestyle? Well, obviously, Taki Mag is probably promoting that type of thing. I was on a show with Jim Goad, who, there's a story unto itself. But I mean, why would they do something like this? This is something good that you've done, and now you're in the position of influencing a lot of other people who looked up to you for other reasons. So, I mean, we're all part of a bigger plan here. We all have roles to play in a plan, in a drama that is so large that we can't comprehend it. We can just see the little parts of it, and that's good. That's good. And good that you're doing that role, and thank you for doing that.
Okay, everyone, I want to urge you, go to culturewars.com to slowly read a lot of the wisdom and the knowledge that Dr. Jones offers. So thank you very much, Dr. Jones. Thank you.
Thank you.